Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that nobody, anywhere, is expecting you. There is no inbox. There is no shift. There is no meeting that could have been an email, because there are no meetings, no emails, and no word for deadline. The sun comes up, your eyes open on their own, and the only item on your calendar is being alive. That sounds like a fantasy. For roughly 95% of human history, it was just Tuesday. Anatomically modern humans have existed for about 300,000 years. Agriculture, the thing that eventually gave us landlords, timesheets, and performance reviews, is barely 12,000 years old. The office is younger than the pyramid's dust, which means that for the overwhelming majority of the time our species has walked this planet, not a single human being ever had a job. No careers, no salaries, no retirement plans, and weirdly, no need for them. So what did they actually do all day? Sit around, starve, fight off saber-toothed cats from dawn to dusk. For a long time, that's exactly what we assumed, that life before civilization was a brutal, desperate scramble, in the words of one very quotable philosopher, nasty, brutish, and short. Then scientists actually checked, and what they found broke a lot of assumptions. This is the story of the longest era of human life, the one with no jobs at all, told through bones, caves, campfires, and one very inconvenient discovery about your work week. First, let's put the modern deal on the table, because you can't appreciate what our ancestors had until you count what we've agreed to. The average person today will spend around 90,000 hours working. That's not a typo. 90,000 hours, roughly a third of your waking adult life, traded for a paycheck. Add commuting, answering messages at dinner, and lying in bed thinking about work, and the number climbs higher. And here's the strange part, we treat this as natural. As human nature, we assume people have always ground away most of their daylight hours just to survive, and that our ancestors simply did the same thing with spears instead of spreadsheets. But a job, showing up at a fixed time, doing tasks someone else assigns, for compensation someone else controls, is a shockingly recent invention. Even after farming appeared, most humans worked with the seasons, not the clock. The rigid schedule you know today was largely built in the last 200 years, in factories, where owners literally had to train the first generation of workers to obey a bell. People hated it. There were riots about it. So the question isn't, why did ancient humans have so much free time? The real question is the reverse. How did a species that lived one way for 300,000 years get talked into this? To answer that, we need evidence. And the best witnesses have been dead for a very long time. Skeletons are terrible at keeping secrets. Your bones record your life like a flight recorder, how you ate, how you moved, what wore you down. And when archaeologists compare the skeletons of ancient hunter-gatherers with the early farmers who came after them, the results are uncomfortable. The foragers were taller. Their teeth were better. Their bones show fewer signs of grinding, repetitive strain. Early farmers, by contrast, shrank. In some regions, average height dropped by several inches, and their remains show more cavities, more anemia, more arthritis, more of the damage you get from doing the same crushing task 10,000 times. Think about what that means. The people with no agriculture, no granaries, no civilization, the ones we picture as starving wretches, were, by most physical measures, healthier than the people who invented farming. Progress showed up, and everyone got shorter. Their diets explain part of it. A forager's menu wasn't grim survival paced, it was wildly diverse. Dozens of plant species. Nuts, tubers, fruit, honey when they could rob a hive without regret. Fish, shellfish, game. Early farmers replaced that buffet with a monotonous pile of 1 or 2 grains, efficient, storable, and nutritionally boring. None of this proves ancient life was paradise. Infant mortality was high, infections could kill, and nobody enjoyed a drought. But the bones force us to drop the cartoon of the desperate caveman. These were strong, well-fed, capable people. And as it turns out, they weren't working very hard to stay that way. In the 1960s, an anthropologist named Richard Lee went to the Kalahari Desert to live among the Juhonsi hunter-gatherers surviving in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. He brought a notebook, and a stopwatch mentality, and he did something almost nobody had bothered to do. He actually measured how much time surviving takes. The result made him famous. The adults around him spent roughly 15 to 20 hours a week acquiring food. Add tool-making and chores, and the total work week still landed far below ours, something like the equivalent of 2.5 working days. In a desert, during a drought, no less, while nearby farmers queued for relief. Other studies of foraging peoples found the same pattern again and again. A few focused hours of effort, then vast stretches of time for everything else. The anthropologist Marshall Salins looked at all this and coined a phrase that still stings. Hunter-gatherers were the original affluent society, not because they had a lot, but because they wanted little and met those wants easily. Here's the logic worth pausing on. Affluence has two roads: produce enormously or need less. We took the first road and never stopped running. They took the second, and by the accounts of the people who lived it, spent most of their existence unbothered. Now, anthropologists have argued about these numbers for decades. Definitions of work vary, and no modern group is a time machine. But even the harshest critics land somewhere astonishing, nothing close to the modern grind. So let's do what the evidence invites us to do. Let's live one of those days. You wake when your body decides it's done sleeping. Not to a shriek from a rectangle, to light, birdsong, the smell of last night's fire still warm under ash. Around you, the camp stirs in its own time. Nobody is late, because late hasn't been invented. Breakfast is whatever's left from yesterday: roasted tubers, a handful of berries, maybe marrow cracked from a bone. Then the day organizes itself, loosely, around one question: what does the camp need? If the answer is plants, and most days it is, a group heads out with digging sticks and carrying bags. Foraging gets dismissed as primitive, but watch it closely and it looks like expertise. These people hold a mental map of hundreds of species: which roots are ready this month, which berries are safe, which lookalikes will end your afternoon dramatically. They read the landscape the way you read a phone screen, constantly, fluently, half-consciously. And the pace is unhurried. Gathering is done in conversation, with children tagging along, learning by doing. A few hours of walking, digging, and gossiping, and the bags are full. That's the shift. That's the whole shift. Notice what hasn't happened. Nobody supervised you. Nobody measured your output. The land is the pantry, and the pantry is open. Storing food mostly makes no sense. It rots, and you'd have to carry it. So there's no stockpile to guard, no surplus to fight over, and nothing to be promoted into. You did the morning's work, and the afternoon now belongs entirely to you. But some days, the camp wants meat. And those days are a different kind of remarkable. Forget the lone caveman flinging a spear and hoping. Human hunting was a team sport, and our species brought two superpowers to it: sweat and friendship. Humans are embarrassingly slow compared to almost everything we ate. But we can do something almost no other animal can: keep going. We cool ourselves by sweating while running, and a kudu can't. Persistence hunters used exactly that: track an animal through the heat of the day, keep it moving, never let it rest, until the fastest creature on the plain simply overheats and stands there, finished. The slowest ape wins by refusing to stop. There's a lesson in that, and gyms have been selling it back to us ever since. The deeper superpower was cooperation. A hunt was choreography, trackers reading hoofprints like sentences, drivers pushing game toward ambushers, everyone trusting everyone else's timing. It demanded planning, communication, and a theory of what other minds, human and animal, would do next. Some scientists think this is precisely the pressure that made our brains so social. And when the hunt succeeded, here's where it gets almost utopian. The meat wasn't hoarded by whoever threw the killing spear. It was shared across the whole camp, according to rules older than memory. Among many foraging peoples, boasting about your kill was a social crime. There were rituals for keeping successful hunters humble, because arrogance divides a camp faster than hunger does. Meat spoils. Reputation doesn't. So the smartest place to store a surplus was inside other people, as obligation, gratitude, and friendship. Your neighbor's full belly today was your insurance policy for next month. That was the economy. No wages. Just a web of people who owed each other dinner forever. So the food is handled, and the sun is still high. Now comes the part of the ancient day that modern life has almost completely deleted. Hours and hours of unassigned time. Some of it went to what we'd call crafts, though chores is the wrong flavor. Knapping a flint blade, straightening an arrow shaft, weaving cordage, scraping a hide soft. This is work in the way a hobby is work. Skilled hands, slow rhythm, conversation running alongside. The archaeological record shows tools refined far past the point of function, symmetry, and finish that scream pride, not necessity. Somebody spent an extra hour making a hand axe beautiful. That hour was not billed to anyone. Some of it went to rest. Actual rest, napping in shade, lying around talking, grooming, doing visibly nothing, without a flicker of guilt, because there was nothing to feel guilty about. Idleness wasn't a moral failure. It was the reward for a species that had solved its afternoon. And an enormous share of it went to children, or rather, came from them. Kids in foraging societies roamed in mixed-age packs, playing at hunting, playing at gathering, playing at adulthood, with almost no adult instruction. Play was the school. By the time a child was grown, they had absorbed a survival education that would humble any survival influencer, and nobody had ever graded them on it. Add it up and you get something that barely has a modern name. A life where skill, leisure, and social time weren't scheduled around work. They were the day itself. And with that much practice time, humans started doing something no animal had ever done. They started making things that meant something. Deep inside Chauvet Cave in France, there are lions. Dozens of them, drawn in charcoal some 30,000 years ago, rendered with shading, perspective, and motion so confident that when the paintings were rediscovered, some experts assumed forgery. Nobody untrained makes lines like that. Which is exactly the point. The artist was trained. Somebody in the Ice Age had time to get that good. And Chauvet is just the famous example. The deep past is littered with unnecessary beauty. Shell beads over 100,000 years old, pierced and strung, carried from coastlines many kilometers away. Ice Age jewelry made from Ice Age shopping trips. Flutes carved from vulture wing bones over 40,000 years ago, their finger holes spaced deliberately, meaning scales, meaning melodies, meaning someone sat by a fire working out a tune while the mammoths grazed. Lumps of ochre ground into pigment for tens of thousands of years, painting bodies, hides, and walls in colors that had no calories in them whatsoever. Every one of these objects is a receipt, proof of hours that didn't go to survival. Art is expensive. It devours time, and the fact that our ancestors spent so lavishly tells you what their time budget really looked like. But here's the detail worth sitting with. None of it was a product. No gallery, no client, no engagement metrics. The painter of those lions walked out of that cave and did not check whether the lions were performing well with audiences. People made things because meaning is what humans do with spare capacity. Beauty wasn't a career. It was a symptom of freedom. Then the sun goes down, and for our ancestors, that's not the end of the day. It's the best part. Fire changed the human schedule like nothing before or since. It added hours of usable time after dark, and those hours had a completely different personality. You can't track antelope at night. You can't dig tubers in the dark. So the firelight hours became the home of everything that wasn't work. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner studied exactly this among the Juhonsi, comparing what people talked about by day versus by night. Daytime talk was practical and gossipy, plans, complaints, who did what. But at night, around the fire, the conversation transformed. The overwhelming majority of it, she measured about 80%, became stories. Myths, adventures, histories, tales of people far away and long dead. Think about what a story does. It installs someone else's experience into your head. A tale about a distant flood, a treacherous stranger, a clever escape. That's survival software, transmitted with jokes and cliffhangers, compressed into an evening. The fire was the classroom, the newsroom, the therapist's couch, and the cinema all at once. Elders were the libraries, and children fell asleep mid-download. This is almost certainly where language flexed into its full power, not in barking commands during a hunt, but in the slow, communal luxury of narration. We didn't evolve to fill out reports. We evolved to hold an audience. And when the stories wound down, Our ancestors did one more thing differently than you. They went to sleep twice. Before artificial light, human sleep had a different shape. Across pre-industrial records, the pattern repeats. People slept a first stretch of about 4 hours, woke naturally around midnight, stayed up for an hour or two, and then slept again until dawn. First sleep and second sleep, with a strange, quiet intermission in between. That midnight hour wasn't insomnia, it was an institution. People tended the fire, talked in low voices, prayed, made love, or lay still in the dark thinking about their dreams, which, in many foraging cultures, were treated as messages worth discussing at breakfast, not mental spam to be deleted. Watches of the night rotated informally. In a camp on an open landscape, somebody was always half awake, feeding the fire, listening. Which meant every sleeper had what a modern mattress company can't sell you, the deep, animal comfort of knowing someone is keeping watch. Then came dawn, and the whole unhurried cycle began again. Follow it around one full turn and count honestly. A few hours acquiring food, a few hours of craft and play, an evening of stories, a night of layered sleep. Where in any of this is the job? Where's the anxious scramble we were promised? To be fair, this life had hard edges. Injuries, infant deaths, feuds, bad seasons. Nobody's romanticizing a burst appendix in 30,000 BC. But between those emergencies stretched something we now pay for in wellness retreats: presence, community, enough. So the obvious question is, why did it end? Who shut this whole thing down? Well, nobody. Everyone. Slowly. And with the best of intentions. Around 12,000 years ago, in a few fertile corners of the world, people began doing something clever. Instead of just gathering wild grain, they planted some. Not to revolutionize humanity, just to smooth out a bad season. A little insurance. A side project. The side project ate the species. Because farming has a catch nobody could see in advance. It produces more food per acre, but demands vastly more labor per person. Clearing, plowing, sowing, weeding, hauling water, harvesting in a brutal race against weather, threshing, storing, guarding. The comfortable 15-hour food week swelled into endless seasons of toil. And the extra food didn't buy leisure. It bought babies. Farming villages boomed, and every extra mouth locked the community harder into farming. Within a few generations, no one could remember how to live any other way, and the wild land that once fed foragers was fields now anyway. The door back had quietly closed. Then came the inventions nobody had needed before. A granary full of wheat is worth stealing, so now you need walls and guards and someone to organize the guards. Stored surplus can be counted, so now it can be taxed. For the first time, some humans could live off other humans' work, and they turned out to be extremely enthusiastic about it. Chiefs, priests, kings, overseers, hierarchy grew straight out of the grain pile. Writing itself was invented in part to track who owed what. Humanity's first spreadsheets were about labor and debt. Some things never change. The historian's dark joke is that we didn't domesticate wheat, wheat domesticated us. It got planetwide propagation. We got back pain and a boss. So let's total the ledger, because it isn't simple. The trade bought real things. Farming's surplus, compounded over millennia, became cities, medicine, mathematics, music you can summon from the air, and the screen you're watching right now. It means an appendix bursting is a bad week, not a death sentence. Almost no one watching this would truly swap their antibiotics for a digging stick. But be honest about the price tag. We solved survival, genuinely solved it. Our ancestors' 15-hour problem now takes society a sliver of its total effort. And instead of collecting all that saved time, we invented new hungers to spend it on. We produce more per hour than any humans in history, and we're the ones with the anxiety apps. Meanwhile, look at what we buy with our wages, on purpose, whenever we finally get time off. Walking in wild places, cooking over open fire with friends, sitting on beaches doing nothing, sharing stories in the dark. We call it a campfire or a cinema. We work 50 weeks a year to afford 2 weeks of behaving exactly like a hunter-gatherer. The point of all this isn't to quit your job and eat bark. The point is calibration. Your restlessness in fluorescent light, your hunger for friends and firelight, You're feeling that this can't be what a day is for. That isn't weakness, and it isn't a disorder. It's memory. 300,000 years of it. Your ancestors weren't working toward the weekend. They lived in a world where the weekend never needed inventing. The life you're grinding toward, free time, community, presence, isn't ahead of you at retirement. It's behind you in the deep past, patiently waiting to be remembered. They didn't have jobs. They had days, and they kept every single hour.